Thank you, Steve. I would be nice to be with you. I'm not actually so sure I like the over 25 years thing because I think the way we're now we're old. We're trying to pretend that we're not. Anyway. We're thrilled to be with you. Andrew and I have followed Steve and Tammy's journey and we prayed for them and we've even given them some money over the years. And we were so excited when they felt like God was saying to move to Milton Keynes. So we've been following their journey attentively for the last couple of years and just been excited to hear all the amazing things that are going on in your midst. So gosh, what fun events and activities. We're going to nick, what was it? Winter electives, we'll nick that. That's great. Steve and Tammy are actually some of our favourite people, and they're some of the most courageous, kingdom-minded people that we know. And just so that you are really lucky to have them. They are not only loved and respected here, and you can feel that in the room when they sound to speak, but in the wider Vineyard movement, they wouldn't ever say this of themselves, but they are very well respected in the Vineyard family, and we love them a lot. So, good. Enough of the puppies looking each other in boxes. Let's move on to what I want to preach to you today about God in the storms of life. Gosh, the past couple of years, or the past few years, have felt pretty stormy, haven't they? We just made it through COVID, and then we saw war in Ukraine, we see war in the Middle East, whatever you think about the American elections. I don't know about you, but there have been seasons where I have literally stopped watching the news because it's too stormy and too stressful. And then, quite apart from the stuff that happens outside, there are the personal storms which come. They take our time, they take our attention, they take our emotion, they take our energy, don't they? You might have just come out of the storm. You might be thinking, that is over. I can now face Christmas. You might be in a storm right now. Or you might be about to be in a storm. Storms in life will come. And often they seem to come completely out of the blue. Maybe something's coming up that you just aren't expecting. And Jesus was really kind and he warned us that that would happen. He said in John chapter 16, I've told you these things so that you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Even though we know it's going to happen, we still find ourselves battling fear, don't we? Fear is our natural response to storms. We fear things that we can't control for good reason. But we don't have to fear the storms. We can have peace in the middle of the storms of life because there is no storm that Jesus doesn't have authority over or that he can't rescue us from. So that's what I want to talk about today. I want us to look at some Bible. And you're probably all expecting that I'm going to go to that story where Jesus is in the boat with his disciples and he calms the storm. But actually, we're going to look at a different story this morning. We're going to centre in the story of Jesus walking on the water. And I want us to look at 3 questions. What is discipleship like in the midst of the storm? What is Jesus like in the midst of the storm? And what does faith look like in those moments? So if you've got a Bible, grab that. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 14 and verse 22 to 36. And hopefully the words are in there. They are already. The words are on the screen. You might want to think as we go on, have you got a boat story? A water story? I was brought up on the south coast of England and I spent most of my childhood in water or on water in some kind of boat or dinghy or canoe or swimming in water, sometimes intentionally swimming in water, sometimes less intentionally because we capsized quite a lot. And I had some pretty scary boat stories over the years. I think the story that we're going to read this morning from Matthew is a pretty scary boat story. The context is, Jesus had just fed the 5,000. It was a high point in his ministry. Actually, scholars think that was 5,000 men. There were also women and children in that gathering. So there would have been about 20,000 people there. And it's amazing. They had a kids' lunchbox with some loaves and some fishes in it. And Jesus fed 20,000 people. People were ecstatic with joy. It was the high point of their lives. And at this point, they're starting to draw parallels. They're thinking back to Moses, God's deliverer in the Old Testament, who fed the multitudes with bread from heaven. And now Jesus is multiplying food, and maybe they're thinking maybe this is God's promised deliverer. And then we launch straight into this story where Jesus walks on the water. So let's go from verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and, beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So let's look at those three questions that I mentioned earlier. Let's start with what's discipleship? Well, what even is discipleship? And what's discipleship in the midst of the storms of life? Well, discipleship is how we're formed by Jesus and how we learn to follow him. Let's go back to Matthew 14 and verse 22-24. So immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat, go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. It said immediately Jesus made them get into the boat. He sent them away to go to the other side of the lake. That word, made them get into the boat, actually means compelled them to go. It's like he shoved them into the boat. Go away. Let me have some peace and quiet. He's got a purpose. He's got a reason, because Jesus knows what's going to happen. So much of our discipleship is not something that we learn by theory. We can't read about it in a book and then go and do it necessarily. But it's by training. The disciples are doing exactly what Jesus told them to do. It doesn't seem like they have a huge amount of choice in it. And they find themselves heading straight into a storm. Now, I think sometimes we get a little bit confused when we try and do the things that Jesus says, and then we find ourselves in a storm. We're like, well, how did that happen? I thought I was doing all the things that Jesus told me to do, and now I'm in this stick. Well, actually, Jesus formed his followers with teaching, but also in the midst of trials. He did it through experiences and through explanations. So we all have times when we find ourselves in the middle of a storm. And the reality of being in the middle of a storm does not mean that we're being obedient to Jesus or not being obedient to Jesus, because he clearly taught us that this was going to happen. Jesus said that both the wise and the foolish builders went through storms. And he also said in the book of James, the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Now, the testing times can be both painful and prolonged, can't they? Painful. In one version, in one translation of this story, it says that the disciples were struggling against the wind and the waves, and they were making headway painfully. They were making painfully slow progress. Rowing, if you've ever tried it, is a really hard job. And it was also prolonged. It says that Jesus came to them, but not until the fourth watch of the night. Now, that was between 3 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the morning. And he sent them off like in the evening yesterday. So they have been in the boat rowing for hours. I don't know if you've ever tried rowing on a rowing machine in the gym. I can do about 6 minutes and I'm pretty much done. 5 minutes, Tammy. Any advance? And it will do more than 6 minutes. It's hard. It's really quite hard. And the disciples have been rowing for a really long time. How long will this last? And then the word beaten by the waves here is the same word as being tormented by demons. This is a really terrible situation they find themselves. The waves are against them, they're desperate. Has following Jesus ever felt like that for you? Desperate, lengthy, long, exhausting. They've got no peace. I don't get it. Why are you letting this happen? Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever shouted at Jesus? I don't get this. I have for sure. We all face times like that. Doesn't mean you're a bad Christian. Despair can feel real. That's just honesty. Being in a storm is not a sign that you're out of the will of God. Our experience can be like the biblical writers, like Paul. He said he was hard pressed, perplexed, persecuted, struck down. Now, I'm really aware that this is sounding rather dismal, but take heart, because God is with us. Like Paul, we can say, in spite of everything that's going on, I'm not crushed, I'm not in despair, I'm not abandoned, I am not destroyed. So here they are, the disciples in the middle of the lake, utterly vulnerable, but, and I find this so reassuring, they've never escaped Jesus' gaze because he's gone up the mountain so he can see the lake. And it says he went up the mountain to pray. I like to think that he's praying for them. He's like, I can see they're my people. I can see they're in a storm. I know this is happening to them. And he's praying for them. He's watching and praying. He's above their circumstances. It's like a picture of the risen Jesus who lives to forever intercede for us. It says that in Hebrews chapter 7. Jesus is at the right hand of the Father. He's praying for you in your storm. The disciples feel totally vulnerable, but they are seen by Jesus. He is at hand. And that is what discipleship is. My personal story is that I've lived with chronic pain for most of my life. The surgeons have tried to rebuild my hips 7 times, I think, so far. And then they gave me a hip replacement, and now that one's failing and they want to do it again. And it started when I was a very little girl. I've been in pain for a very long number of years. And there have been moments where I've gone, God, where are you? It's been painful, it's been prolonged, and I've felt beaten down. But I've observed that there are different ways that Jesus works in our life. We would all love the kind of overcoming faith, the kind of miracle that delivers us instantly kind of faith. But sometimes we don't see that. Sometimes we have to practice enduring faith. Sometimes we get to experience the grace of God that sustains us in the middle of those moments. And we might see God move by giving us the manna in the wilderness, the food for many, many years, rather than the instant deliverance of the Red Sea parting. I heard a quote that said, in the middle of a storm, God doesn't promise escape, but he does promise his presence. So whether you're set free instantly from your storm or whether you're sustained in the middle of your storm, it's all God's work and it's all part of how he forms us into his disciples. And the key is to remember that he is with us in it. I read this: the storm may be raging, but the one who calms the seas is with you. Sometimes he calms the storm, sometimes he lets it rage and calms you. The key is he is with us. Turn your attention to him. Reach out to him and see what his response will be to you in that moment. So secondly, what is Jesus like? Who is this person who we're reaching out to in the middle of our storms? Let's go back to verse 25. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Now, at that time, the Jewish people believed that the sea was a reservoir of evil forces. It was a place of chaos. And here comes Jesus walking on this sea. He's walking on the lake. He's on top of the water, and they are terrified. Now, remember, these guys are tough. They're tough fishermen. They endure all weathers. And they're crying out in fear, so it must have been bad. Jesus says, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Literally, he says, take courage. I. This is a really significant moment because by saying I am, Jesus is clearly telling them that he is God. Because I am was the personal name for God in the Old Testament, and the disciples would have known that. Jesus uses this name of God for himself many times in the Gospels. In John 8, Jesus said, truly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. It's God's name, how he reveals himself. It's not a ghost. He's not just a man. They are meeting God. God has stepped onto the water. Take courage. I. So as Jesus meets his followers in their storm, showing authority over the wind, over the waves, over nature, in that moment, suddenly, they have a revelation of who he is. And we can too, in the middle of our storms. And that is so often the way it is. In the Bible, if you read any of the stories, there are so many revelations of God that come in the midst of a trial or in the midst of pain. People in pain, people under pressure, people carrying fear, people feeling desperately alone. Because these moments in our lives can be times where we get to understand another aspect of the character of God in a deeper way. These are times when our head knowledge can become heart knowledge. And we simply wouldn't have that understanding of Jesus if we hadn't been through the storm. So here's just a few examples. The disciples in the boat, they're meeting Jesus, the Lord. The revelation of the name of God given to Moses. And Jesus is saying, take courage, I am, don't be afraid. And he delivers them from their fear. But in Genesis, we see Abraham meeting the Lord who provides, as he provided a ram to be sacrificed in place of his son. In Exodus, we see the Lord is our banner. When Moses lifted his hands to heaven and they saw victory over their enemies because God was his banner. We see Gideon meeting the Lord our peace. When he was from the weakest clan, he was the least in his family, he was so gripped by fear that he was fighting in a wine press. And he met the angel of the Lord who revealed peace to him. We see King David, hounded by Saul, realizing that God cared for his soul as the Lord his shepherd. And we see Hagar, alone, pregnant, desperate in the wilderness after being driven out by Sarah. She says, I've seen the God who sees me. All these revelations of God came in the midst of trials and tests, in pain and distress. So you might not see God as your provider until your own resources run out. You might need to be in a moment of distress and fear before you come to see God as your peace. You might not know God as your shepherd until you realize that your soul needs rest. In moments when you feel isolated or misunderstood or unseen, you can find the God who sees me. In the heartache of loss and grief, we can know the God of all comfort. And when we fail and mess up, which we all do, when we're keenly aware of our own sin and brokenness, we come to understand in a new way that Jesus is the friend of sinners. And as Tim Keller said, you don't really know that Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you have. We get to know God then in the midst of our trials, in the midst of our storms. So what does it look like to be a person of faith in these moments? Well, we know the story. We've read it a little bit earlier. Peter says, God, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. And as you know, Peter got out of the boat, he walked on the water, he came towards Jesus. He panicked. He started to sink. And he cried out, Lord, save me. And what did Jesus do? Kind Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You have little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And they got back into the boat, the wind died down, and the people worshipped God. Now, we've got no idea what possessed Peter to suddenly say, I'm going to get out of the boat. I mean, this guy was active, he was larger than life, he was impetuous, ready for anything. He probably was one of those guys that acted first and thought later, like kind of endearing but somewhat risky. But this is more than temperament for Peter. This was an expression of his faith. Something in him wanted to be where Jesus was, even if it was outside of the boat. So faith listens to God's word. Peter said, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. And Jesus said, come. He waited till he heard Jesus' voice. Because our faith, is based on a person. If it's you, command me to walk on the water, Jesus. He only wants to go if he hears Jesus' voice. And based on Jesus' voice, Peter gets out of the boat and starts to walk on the water. If Jesus says come, then we come. One word was enough for Peter. We have a whole book full of words. We can find out what Jesus is saying to us in here. And if Jesus says come, if Jesus says to you to do something, then that is a better place, a safer place to stand than anywhere else, even if it seems crazy. So in our storms, we need to listen to the words of Jesus. How is he speaking to you in this season of your life? Are you taking time to listen to him? Are you taking time to be quiet, to sit with him, to read his word, to pray, and to listen? I could really encourage you, if you're in a storm, I mean, gosh, my tendency will be to rush around and try and fix it and try and control everything and make it right for myself. Actually, the most important thing, the most valuable thing, the most life-giving, peace-filling thing that I can do, that we can do in the midst of a storm is stop, take a deep breath, and I'm going to say, Jesus, what would you say to me in this moment? Secondly, faith moved us towards Jesus. We see that Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards him. Faith often takes us outside what's familiar or comfortable. The boat probably wasn't that comfortable, but it was familiar. They knew that they had something of safety in there. It can be a step towards Jesus, but a step that we've never taken before. The founder of our Vineyard movement, John Wimber, once famously said that faith is spelt R-I-S-K, risk. So faith might involve trusting God with a big decision. It might involve something around money. It might involve moving to a new place in the country, which Steve and Tanya got really excellent at. It might involve something to do with relationships, or stepping out to show your faith, or praying for a friend, or leading a group, or planting a church. These are all steps of faith. Faith often takes us beyond what's comfortable, beyond what's predictable, beyond what's known. But if we want to walk on water, like Peter did, we have to get out of our boat. But let's be honest, genuine faith can also be mixed with doubt, because we saw what happened to Peter. He got out and then he suddenly started to doubt, and that was the point that he began to sink. This is real faith. This is where the rubber hits the road. We're real, we're frail, we're human, and we do have real struggles. Even after Jesus was resurrected from the dead, they still had doubts. And it says when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And I think this is so kind of God to include these verses in the Bible. It's so reassuring for us, because so many leaders, so many household names in church history have gone through the same process of going, what? Is it real? Is it true? Let's not fear doubt. Let's not fear questions. Let's use it to discover again who Jesus is. Maybe you relate to what that loving father in Mark chapter 9 said when he was asking for help. He was asking Jesus to help his son who was sick. He said, I believe, help my unbelief. And then faith cries out. You see Peter crying out, Lord, save me. I'm sure he shouted really loud. We need to cry out. And sometimes we need to cry out quickly. God, help my faith. Don't get passive. Don't just shut down. Don't walk off in the opposite direction. Talk to him. God, I'm really struggling right now. I'm finding this really hard, because in your heart you know that Jesus has the answer. We know that. And that when we cry out, Lord, save me, we need to speak to him about it. There's an urgency. I found a quote from a US pastor who said, unbelief talks to itself, faith talks to God. So talk to him about it. He wants to hear. He wants to be like when our kids were scared about something, we didn't want them to go off in their bedroom and shut the door and keep themselves to themselves. We wanted to know. We wanted them to talk to us about it. And sometimes I think that we get scared about something, or we just feel a bit unsettled, or we just find ourselves asking questions, and we don't always go to the one who can reassure us. Talk to him. Well, when our girls came to us and said, I'm scared about this, we're like, oh, how can we speak faith to you? How can we speak courage to you? How can we make it better? That's the Father. That's what he wants to do for each one of us. And then faith is directed at someone totally unchanging and wonderfully kind. Jesus immediately, it says, reached out his hand. He didn't wait. He didn't say, I'm going to let you struggle for a little bit longer. He immediately reached out his hand and caught him. And I can just imagine the kindness in his face. You have little faith. Why did you doubt? He doesn't say, oh, you silly young man, you should have doubted. You shouldn't have doubted. You should have just done it. And he's like, no, why? Come on, I'm going to help you. We all have storms and struggles. We all lose our footing sometimes. But Jesus is kind to us when we go through that. He gets us back on our feet. God doesn't always give us a way out of the storm, but he does give us a way through it. And his presence with us is our strength. What a promise for us in the midst of our storms, in moments when our faith falters, no matter what you're going through, Jesus reaches out his hand today. His arms are strong enough to save us. His grip is secure enough to hold us. His love is strong enough to lift us up when we're sinking. And Tom Wright said, the moment when we are most strongly tempted to give up is probably the moment when help is, if only we knew it, just a step away. And then lastly, faith is about bringing glory to God. We see that when Peter and Jesus got back into the boat and the wind died down, it says, then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. I think that this whole process, everything that Jesus just took the disciples through, it was a plan by Jesus to get them certain, to get them believing and knowing at a deeper level who he really is, to get them to say, you really are the Son of God. And I dare say that this revelation of Jesus came in a storm, but it stayed with them. Next time they were in a storm, they were going to fear a little bit less, panic a little bit less. And Jesus is establishing worship in their hearts, because worship is telling God who he is, isn't it? It's saying to Jesus, this is who you are. This is who you are. This is why I love you. And the disciples come out of this story with a new, stronger, deeper conviction about who Jesus is. He truly is the Son of God. And then they would worship him. And maybe like good Jewish boys they were, they would have remembered that bit in Job where it says, he alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. So we worship in our trials, and we worship when we've been delivered from our trials. Jesus is worthy all the time to be worshipped. I was really challenged by something that I heard Bill Johnson from Reading in California say when he preached just 2 days after his wife had died. And he said this, it was really moving. There is something I can give to God in this moment that I'll never be able to give to him at another time. A sacrifice of praise. In this life, I get to worship and trust God in the midst of my trials. That is a gift of worship that I'll never be able to give in heaven. So the disciples knew that they were in the presence of God, and they worshipped him. So we've seen a little bit what discipleship is like, what Jesus is like, and what faith can be like. So are you in a storm right now? I want to reassure you that Jesus is with you in the midst of it. He's wanting to give you a revelation of the character of God. He's wanting to redeem something from your trial that you will take with you for the rest of your life. Or maybe you're called to step out of your boat and take a step of faith. Maybe you're being called to trust God in a new way. I want us to take some space now to reflect and respond. Is Jesus calling you to do something that seems impossible? We're going to take some time, but I just want to finish with something that Rick Warren said. He said this: when you're going through something hard and you wonder where God is, remember the teacher is always quiet during the test. Storms remind us that life is not always within our control, but they also remind us that God's peace is available in the midst of chaos, and his power is greater than any storm that we face. So we're going to take a little bit of time to respond to the Lord right now. So I invite you to stand, and we're going to invite the Holy Spirit to come to us.